Hola, yo soy Horacio Pérez y esto es Investigando la Investigación, un podcast donde investigamos cómo investigan los investigadores, tanto en la academia, industria, independientes. Todo ello mediante entrevistas y debates abiertos, técnicas y estrategias para mejorar todas las partes del proceso investigador y, no menos importante, opiniones abiertas que espero llamen tu curiosidad y te hagan también reflexionar. Hola, hoy tenemos otro episodio de podcast asíncrono grabado en nuestra comunidad de investigadores en WhatsApp. No me voy a entretener en explicar otra vez cómo funciona. Si queréis saberlo en detalle, os podéis ir al episodio número 205 del podcast, donde está explicado con todo lujo de detalles. Bien, únicamente mencionar que algunos de los episodios anteriores han sido en castellano y el episodio de hoy, la entrevista asíncrona de hoy, es en inglés con acento neozelandés. Y también recordar que si queréis participar en estos episodios, que pueden ser donde comentas tu investigación entre diferentes investigadores de diferentes áreas y especialidades y crear un episodio asíncrono, a partir de él te puedes unir a nuestra comunidad a través de la siguiente dirección: horacio-ps.com/comunidad. Y sí, lo tengo que aclarar porque alguna vez me lo preguntan, Horacio es con H y empieza con C. Bueno, pues vamos al episodio de hoy. En este episodio he entrevistado a Andrea Calude, que es una lingüista rumana que vive en Nueva Zelanda y que estudia patrones lingüísticos usando diversas técnicas computacionales a través del procesamiento de grandes conjuntos de datos, los cuales obtiene de redes sociales. Y ha trabajado principalmente con la red Twitter, pero también le interesan otras como Instagram y TikTok. Es obviamente un estudio dentro del punto de vista académico, y en las notas del programa os voy a poner el enlace a la publicación que vamos a analizar hoy y también a su página web por si queréis saber un poco más sobre lo que hace. En definitiva, en este trabajo lo que hace es comparar las situaciones del punto de vista lingüístico entre Nueva Zelanda y Australia. Se da la situación de que Nueva Zelanda busca ser bicultural y bilingüe y para ello incorpora palabras y términos de su lengua indígena llamada maorí al inglés en su versión neozelandesa. Por otra parte, Australia está más atrasada en esa tendencia, ya que algunas palabras aborígenes que se han trasladado al inglés australiano no lo han hecho en la misma escala y por tanto son situaciones muy diferentes, aunque no haya tanta distancia geográfica entre estos dos países. Además, menciona ella que donde existe el multilingüismo, como en las conversaciones bilingües, se produce una especie de cambio de código, ya que se mezclan los idiomas, y esto se ve muy bien en las redes sociales que ella investiga, y para ello ella detecta, estudia, analiza esos patrones lingüísticos mediante herramientas computacionales. Conviene resaltar que ella tiene estudios tanto de humanidades como de ingeniería informática. Entonces, en sus estudios comenta cómo la gente se adapta en las conversaciones al cambio de idioma y que todo ello depende muchísimo de la plataforma donde interactúan, ya sea esta LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, etcétera, etcétera. Y además comenta casos muy interesantes donde existen desafiantes casos de mezcla del inglés con otros idiomas. También mencionar que Andrea trabaja en equipos colaborativos donde aplican inteligencia artificial, porque no es tan fácil como conseguir todos estos datos de Twitter, sino que hay que procesarlos, limpiarlos, etcétera, y que aplicar avanzados conocimientos estadísticos para obtener las conclusiones a las que ella llega en sus estudios. Entre otras de sus conclusiones, ella analiza los hashtags en Twitter para ver cómo se forman esas palabras, digamos, bilingües que terminan formándose en estas redes sociales, cómo se mezclan esos idiomas y cómo finalmente y actualmente se está dando en Nueva Zelanda ese impulso a esa biculturalidad y bilingüismo entre el maorí y el inglés neozelandés. Bueno, no os cuento más, este ha sido un poco un resumen del capítulo y a continuación os pongo directamente la entrevista que he tenido con ella. Que la disfrutéis y espero que os sea muy interesante.
Hi everybody, my name is Andrea Calude and I'm a Romanian-born linguist working and living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, down at the very bottom of the planet. And I do linguistics research in my job, in my day-to-day job, but my background is in pure mathematics and linguistics, and I have a very quantitative view of language, so I work with data. Sometimes I call myself a data linguist because I'm interested in an empirical approach to the study of language, and so I work with either transcriptions of conversations, spontaneous conversations. This is something I've done for my PhD. And these are computerized transcriptions that are then searchable for patterns. Or I work with written data, and lately I've been very interested in how we use language on social media platforms, a little bit like the kind of platform that I'm coming to you on, either through WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and so on. So this is what my passion is, and I'm very interested to meet everybody and be part of this exciting community. So thank you for inviting me.
Thanks a lot, Andrea, for the introduction. I think it's a very interesting area in the cross fields of computing and language. So my first question would be, how did you get into that? Because usually, from experience, people get into kind of languages, literature, or they get into computing, but it's kind of not usual to get into a mixture or intersection of both fields.
For me, the approach to language of using data and looking for patterns seemed like the most natural one. Even though, as a student, I was often introduced to kind of interesting and quirky things that happen in languages all over the world, depending on what we were studying. I often found it actually very difficult to come up with some of these things myself. I always took more comfort from actually looking at data than coming up with my own completely kind of out of thin air hypotheses. Once I had some kind of examples of language in front of me, I was always much more comfortable. So I think this is why I naturally gravitated towards a quantitative view of language, which was then shaped by the kinds of data that were becoming available increasingly, bigger data sets, using more computational methods.
Thanks for the answer. My next question would be, which exact data sets and techniques and computational analysis techniques do you use now? I know it is a technical question, but perhaps somebody is interested in this. I would be really interested because we are also getting into that kind of field. And I don't know if this is somehow related to what at the moment all these ChatGPT and GPT-3 things are showing now about its incredible capabilities and outstanding ways of generating text, because I see now that they can generate unbelievable texts, but of course one should take care of the real capabilities of such tools, but I don't see people kind of using them in order to analyze already available text and getting those patterns that you are mentioning now.
That's a really good question. So I tend to work in teams, and a lot of the time my collaborators are from a computing background, which means that they often train students to use, for example, machine learning techniques to get data. This is one of the computational methods that we use in our joint research. So we tend to use computational methods mainly for data collection and data cleaning. And so I don't actually run those kind of methods myself, but I have sufficient literacy to be able to understand what they do roughly and what we're getting from them and what it all kind of means. And then I use some statistics in R usually to look for patterns. So that's kind of the way in which I kind of engage both my sort of quantitative computational side of things and language analysis.
Can you give us some example of the patterns that you find in your studies?
So the patterns that we find very much depend on what it is that we're looking for. So in some of the data we collected, we wanted to have a look at how New Zealand English speakers are using English online on, say, Twitter. And we wanted to also look at how they mix languages. And in New Zealand, we have an indigenous language called te reo Maori. And we're very interested to see how words from Maori flow into New Zealand English. This is a very, very unusual kind of direction of flow of words. You all know this already. Languages borrow words. They've done so for centuries, and that's not newsworthy. But what is surprising is that with New Zealand English, we find that the words that are being borrowed into New Zealand English en masse overwhelmingly come from a non-dominant indigenous, kind of largely still threatened language. So we're really interested to study how Māori words are used by New Zealanders. So it's not unusual in New Zealand to be greeted, rather than being greeted by hello or good day, it's not unusual to be greeted with the phrase kia ora, which is a Māori phrase meaning hello. So in our data, to come back to patterns, we're looking to see how Twitter users are combining resources, lexical resources from Māori into New Zealand English, and we wanted to know which words they're using and how often. And, you know, there's lots of interesting stuff going on, but one of the really interesting and maybe in some ways not particularly surprising thing that we discovered is that people are being extremely playful online. So users combine lexical resources in a very clever and strategic way for humorous and creative purposes. So they combine, for example, words from both Māori and English to create new hashtags. We're calling these hybrid hashtags. So an example might be something like hashtag kai to put in your fridge, which means kai means food, so food that you might have in your fridge. And the tweet often contains humorous things that somebody might have in their fridge. Or, you know you're a Kiwi when. The word kiwi is a borrowing from Māori. New Zealanders use the word kiwi, which is the flightless bird, as a symbol of national identity. And so the hashtag, you know you're a Kiwi when, is used to share humorous experiences of growing up in New Zealand.
And have you compared with another kind of geographical situations to check or to investigate if similar situations in very far away places exist? I don't know, for instance, I could think about Australia because it's somehow close to New Zealand, and I don't know if they have also these kind of local, ancient local language words and dialects, and if they introduce them or mix them also with Australian English, or same situation on some other places of the earth. And also if you can obtain such patterns, not just talking about English in different parts of the world, but for any language, any kind of language that mixes with the kind of all ancient indigenous languages from that place?
It is indeed an interesting question to consider Australia. We are very close to them, but the actual linguistic situation is very different because in New Zealand, our indigenous language is Maorí, and there are different varieties of Maorí, what people like to think of as dialects, but in the main, we're talking about one kind of main language with very closely related dialects. Whereas in Australia, we're talking about 300 Aboriginal languages that are all quite different and mutually unintelligible. And they have suffered huge challenges, discrimination, and just terrible inequities, and at the hands of the kind of colonizers, and so in various ways. And so because of those reasons, the situation is very different in Australia, and we do have a smattering of words from Aboriginal languages, like didgeridoo, for example, is one, that come into Australian English, but nowhere on the scale of the ones from Maori that we see coming into New Zealand English. Also, New Zealand is very clear on its current political stance and wanting to become more kind of bicultural, bilingual as a nation, and so the push for Māori at all levels is much more present. Whereas in Australia, in many ways, Australia is kind of, you might think of it as kind of behind this trend. So it's very different, I guess, is the short answer to that, and it's not similar to us. You ask as well about other language mixing situations, and of course you will know probably from your own context, you and I are talking in English, and you're a Spanish speaker and I'm a Romanian speaker, so wherever there's people and multilingualism, there's language mixing. So English is the language that often creeps up in various other language exchanges. So people borrow from English, and we definitely see mixed language use in Urdu and English tweets, and Greek and English tweets, and there's Greek and German tweets, and you name it, Turkish and German, wherever people meet and interact from different languages, you will get language mixing. In linguistics, we call that code switching, and code switching is very well documented in general, in typically conversation, but we're seeing a lot of that surfacing in social media, which is interesting and also challenging.
And talking about social media, which kind of media do you study? Okay, because there are many different possibilities nowadays. You have Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram. I don't know. There are so many different possibilities that I don't know if you are more focused on one specific social media platform, and also if you study all of them, if you think you can extract different conclusions depending on the platform that you study, because people there behave or kind of interact in different ways. I don't know, what will be your kind of impression here?
Absolutely. We do think that different social media platforms will absolutely give different, conclusions. It really depends what it is that you're asking, of course. We've mostly, in my lab, been dealing with Twitter just because of ease of access of data. Interrogating the Twitter API with Python code is relatively more straightforward than other social media platform options. I would really like to do studies with other platforms. I think Instagram is quite interesting because I do think the visual aspect that Instagram provides, a lot of the posts are related to images, of course. You have to have an image. And so I think it does have a bearing on the kind of language you see. And also it kind of gives you an idea of the way in which context is set up. I think if you have an image, then the image and the text, my guess would be the image and the text work together, and so you're possibly doing kind of different things with the text. The text is more a subtext to the image, whereas if you're just writing a post on Twitter that happens to have an image with it or a link, then the main message is captured in the text. I think we do absolutely interact very differently on different platforms, and it's been shown in other research that LinkedIn, for instance, which you mentioned, is, the informal term is Facebook in a suit, because the audience in LinkedIn is largely a professional one. People use it to connect with potential employers or colleagues. So they use standard language forms. They use the higher prestige varieties of a language, whereas in platforms like TikTok and Instagram, it really depends on the community they're addressing. I mean, if you're hanging out in the more professional groups, then of course your language will adapt accordingly. So I think we've learned to be very versatile online, which is interesting. And at the moment, one of the projects that I'm looking at involves looking at hashtags and looking at what they are, as a language element. What are they? Are they words? Are they not words? How do we get them? What word formation processes might be involved? That kind of thing.
Pues aquí termina este episodio de hoy. Otra vez, recordad que es un episodio asíncrono, grabado en nuestra comunidad de investigadores en WhatsApp. Si queréis saber más detalles de cómo funciona toda esta metodología, os vais y escucháis el episodio número 205 del podcast. Y si queréis participar, horacio-ps.com/comunidad. Y también, tengo que decirlo todo, si quieres estar pendiente de todas las novedades y de técnicas y estrategias para mejorar tus procesos de investigación, también te puedes suscribir a nuestra newsletter en horacio-ps.com/newsletter. Día que no estás, consejo de investigación que te pierdes. Y nada más, espero que te haya sido muy interesante este episodio y que te haga reflexionar. A mí las cosas que más me han gustado han sido, lo primero, como siempre, el que se trata de una investigación multidisciplinar, quizás encuadrada dentro del mundo de las humanidades digitales que tan de moda se están poniendo a día de hoy. Y por otra parte, saber qué investigaciones se realizan en partes del mundo tan distantes, en este caso Nueva Zelanda. Y por último, el reflejo de por qué y cómo no una situación bilingüe positiva y constructiva se puede dar en otras partes del mundo. Pues nada más, espero que os haya sido muy interesante y hasta el próximo episodio de tu podcast Investigando la Investigación. ¡Hasta luego!